The knife was already at her throat when Elena Hartley realized the wedding gown was the only thing standing between her and the truth. She had heard the whisper only seconds before, a soft laugh from behind the altar curtain, a voice that did not belong to any guest. Damien Ashgrove, the Alpha King of Blackthorn, was supposed to be waiting for her at the front of the hall, ready to bind his life to hers in front of 300 wolves. Instead, through a gap in the fabric, Elena saw him standing close to Seraphine Vale, his hand resting on her arm, his head bent toward her ear. Elena's heart did not break slowly. It broke all at once, like glass dropped on stone. She had 2 minutes before she was due to walk down that aisle. 2 minutes to decide whether she would spend the rest of her life married to a man who already belonged to someone else. She chose herself. Elena slipped out through the side door of the pack hall, her wedding gown bunched in her fists, her bare feet slapping against the cold stone floor, because she had kicked off her heels the moment she started running. Behind her, she could hear the murmur of the crowd rising into confusion, then panic, then her own name being called by voices that did not yet understand she was never coming back. She ran until the hall was nothing but a glow of light behind the trees, until her lungs burned and her legs shook, until she reached the old service road that led out of Blackthorn territory and into the human world beyond the border markers. She did not look back once. If she had, she might have seen Damien burst through the same door only 90 seconds after her, roaring her name into the night, his eyes flashing gold with the fury of a wolf whose mate had just vanished from his grasp. But Elena did not look back. She kept running and running until the trees of Blackthorn were a memory and the human world swallowed her whole. 5 years later, the town of Millbrook smelled like sea salt and warm bread, and nobody there had ever heard the name Elena Hartley. They knew her as Elena Doyle, the woman who ran the little bakery on Harbor Street, the one with flour always dusted on her apron, and a laugh that made customers come back, even when the coffee was too strong. She had built a life here, brick by brick, with her own 2 hands. And she had built it around 2 small people who meant more to her than her own heartbeat. Kai and Luna were 5 years old now, twins with dark hair and sharp golden eyes that Elena had learned to hide behind sunglasses whenever strangers looked too closely. They were fast, stronger than other children their age, and prone to fits of temper that made furniture shake if they were not careful. Elena had raised them alone, teaching them control before they even understood what they were controlling. She had never told them about their father. She had never told anyone. On a bright Tuesday morning, while Elena was pulling a tray of cinnamon rolls from the oven, the bell above the bakery door rang, and a tall man in a dark coat stepped inside. Elena did not look up right away. She was used to strangers passing through Millbrook, tourists drawn by the harbor views, business travelers stopping for coffee before their next meeting. She wiped her hands on her apron and turned toward the counter, with her usual customer smile already forming. The smile died on her lips. Damien Ashgrove stood in the doorway of her bakery, 5 years older, 5 years harder, but unmistakably himself. His shoulders filled the frame of the door. His eyes, the same molten gold as their children's, swept the small shop with the sharp attention of a predator who had just caught a scent he had chased for half a decade. For one long moment, neither of them moved. Then Kai came running out from the back room, laughing, chasing his sister with a wooden spoon, and stopped dead when he saw the stranger standing at the counter. Damien's gaze dropped to the boy, to the dark hair, to the golden eyes, to the faint silver birthmark on the child's wrist, shaped like a crescent moon, the same mark that had been passed down through every firstborn son of the Ashgrove line for 300 years. The color drained from Damien's face. "Elena," he said, and his voice cracked around her name, like it had been carrying it for 5 long years, and could finally set it down. "Whose child is this?" Elena's hands trembled at her sides, but she lifted her chin, the same way she had lifted it the night she ran from her own wedding. "Get out of my shop, Damien." "Whose child is this?" he said again, louder now, stepping forward, and Luna appeared in the doorway behind her brother, drawn by the sound of raised voices, her small face curious and unafraid, in the way of children who had never learned to be scared of strangers. 2 sets of golden eyes, 2 children who looked exactly like him. Damien did not need Elena to answer. He already knew. "They're mine," he said, and it was not a question anymore. It was a declaration, a fact settling into the world like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples out in every direction, that would not stop moving for a long time to come. Elena stepped between him and the children, her body a wall, her voice steady, even though her heart was slamming against her ribs. You don't get to walk in here after 5 years and claim anything. You lost that right the night I left. I have spent 5 years looking for you, Damien said, and something in his voice had shifted from fury to something rawer, something that sounded almost like grief. Every territory, every human city. I never stopped. You didn't need to look very hard, Elena said bitterly. I wasn't hiding from the whole world, Damien. I was hiding from you. Kai tugged on Elena's sleeve, his golden eyes wide. Mama, who is he? Elena knelt quickly, wrapping an arm around her son, keeping her eyes on Damien the entire time. He's nobody, sweetheart. He was just leaving. But Damien did not leave. He stood in the doorway of that small bakery, watching the family he had lost, without ever knowing he had lost it. And something inside him, that had been frozen for 5 years, began, slowly and painfully, to thaw. I'm not going anywhere, he said quietly. Not this time. The bell above the door rang again, as a customer walked in, oblivious to the storm breaking apart the small shop, and Elena forced her face into something calm, something normal, while her entire world rearranged itself around the man she had run 5 years and 300 miles to escape. That night, after the bakery closed and the twins were finally asleep upstairs, Elena found Damien waiting outside her door, leaning against the railing of her small porch, his coat collar turned up against the evening chill. You need to leave, she said, though she made no move to close the door. I need answers first, Damien said. 5 years, Elena. 5 years I searched for you, and you were building this whole life without me, raising my children without a single word. Your children, Elena repeated, and something sharp entered her voice. You mean the children I carried alone, delivered alone, raised alone, while you were probably wrapped up in Seraphine Vale's arms within a week of my leaving. Damien's jaw tightened. Is that what you think happened? I saw you, Elena snapped, the memory rising hot and fresh, even after 5 years. The night of our wedding. I saw you with her behind the curtain, her hand on your arm, your head bent down like you were sharing secrets. Don't stand there and pretend I imagined it. For a long moment, Damien said nothing. Then he exhaled, slow and heavy, like a man setting down a weight he had carried too long. Seraphine came to me that night begging for one more chance, he said. She had heard I was marrying you, and she panicked. I told her it was over between us, that it had been over for months before I ever met you, and that nothing she said would change my mind. I was telling her no, Elena. I was telling her goodbye. Elena's breath caught. That's not what it looked like. I know, Damien said, his voice rough. And I have spent 5 years wondering why you never gave me the chance to explain. Why you ran, instead of asking me what you saw. Because I was terrified, Elena admitted, the words spilling out before she could stop them. Terrified of spending my whole life as the wife who was never quite enough. I would rather have run than live with that fear every single day. They stood there in silence, the porch light flickering above them. 5 years of unspoken pain finally cracking open between them, like an old wound reopened to the air. I want to know my children, Damien finally said. Whatever you think of me, whatever happened between us, they deserve to know their father. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, staring at the man who had once been her whole future, now a stranger standing on her porch, with the same golden eyes as her twins. You can't just walk into their lives and expect everything to be simple, she said quietly. They don't know anything about wolves, about packs, about kings. They think monsters only exist in stories. Then we teach them slowly, Damien said. Together, if you'll let me. Elena studied his face for a long moment, searching for the lie she was certain must be hiding there, the same lie she thought she had seen 5 years ago. But all she found was exhaustion, and hope, and something that looked painfully like love, that had never once faded, no matter how many miles or years had come between them. One visit, she said finally, tomorrow. If it goes well, we'll talk about what comes next. Damien nodded, relief washing over his features so completely that for a moment he looked young again, like the man she had fallen in love with before fear and misunderstanding tore them apart. Thank you, he said softly. Elena closed the door before he could see the tears gathering in her eyes. tears she had promised herself she would never shed over Damien Ashgrove again. But as she climbed the stairs to check on her sleeping children, she could not stop the thought that had lodged itself in her chest the moment she saw him standing in her bakery doorway. 5 years of running had not been enough to escape him, and now, standing on the other side of that door, was the one truth she had never been able to outrun. Some bonds were stronger than fear, stronger than distance, and stronger than 5 long years of silence. Somewhere out in the dark, beyond the reach of the porch light, unseen eyes watched the small house on Harbor Street, marking the location, marking the children, marking the beginning of a danger that neither Elena nor Damien could yet imagine. The peace of Millbrook was already beginning to end. Morning light spilled across Harbor Street as Elena stood behind her counter, hands shaking too much to properly knead the dough in front of her. Today Damien would meet his children as their father, not as a stranger passing through town. She had barely slept, her mind circling the same fears over and over. What if the twins liked him too much? What if they asked questions she could not answer? What if letting him in meant losing the quiet, safe world she had built for them, brick by brick, over 5 long years? The bell above the door rang at exactly 9 in the morning, and Damien stepped inside wearing plain clothes instead of the dark coat from the day before, trying, Elena realized, to look less like a king and more like an ordinary man. "You're early," she said. "I didn't want to be late," Damien replied, his eyes drifting toward the back room, where the sound of small feet could already be heard, thumping down the stairs. Kai appeared first, curious as always, followed closely by Luna, who clutched a stuffed rabbit against her chest and studied the stranger, with the same sharp attention her father used when assessing a threat. "Kai, Luna," Elena said gently, kneeling down to their level. "This is Damien. He's going to be spending some time with us." Kai tilted his head. "Are you the man from yesterday, the one who made Mama upset?" Elena's cheeks flushed, but Damien only smiled softly, crouching down so he was eye level with his son for the first time in 5 years. "I didn't mean to upset your mother," Damien said. "I was just very happy to see her again, and very happy to see you and your sister." Luna stepped closer, studying his face with unusual boldness for a child her age. "Your eyes look like mine." "They do," Damien said, his voice thick with emotion he was fighting hard to control. "That's because we're family." The words hung in the air, simple enough for 2 5-year-olds to accept without question, though Elena's heart pounded at how easily the truth had slipped out. Kai's eyes widened. "Family? Like a daddy?" Elena opened her mouth to soften the moment, to explain slowly, carefully, the way she had planned. But Damien beat her to it. "Yes," he said, his voice steady despite the tears gathering at the corners of his eyes. "I'm your father. I have been looking for you and your sister and your mother for a very long time." Silence stretched through the bakery, broken only by the soft hum of the oven and the distant sound of gulls outside. Then Kai, with the simple honesty of a child, threw his arms around Damien's neck. "I always wondered what a daddy felt like," he said quietly. Damien's composure cracked completely. He wrapped his arms around his son, holding him as though he might vanish if he let go. 5 years of searching finally rewarded with a small, warm weight against his chest. Luna hesitated only a moment longer before joining her brother, wrapping her small arms around her father's shoulders, still clutching her stuffed rabbit in one fist. Elena watched from a few steps away, tears sliding silently down her cheeks, torn between the joy of watching her children finally know their father and the fear of everything this reunion might bring crashing down upon their quiet lives. Over the following days, Damien became a careful, steady presence in the twins' world. He arrived each morning before the bakery opened, sat through breakfast arguments about who got the last pancake, learned that Kai hated peas and Luna refused to sleep without a nightlight shaped like a crescent moon, a detail that made Damien's throat tighten every time he saw it glowing softly from her doorway. He took them to the harbor to watch the fishing boats come in. He learned Luna's favorite color was silver, not because it was pretty, but because it reminded her of the moon, and that Kai wanted to be strong enough one day to protect his sister from anything that might come after her. Neither child understood yet what that protection might one day require of them, and Damien found himself grateful, at least for now, that their innocence remained intact. Elena watched all of this unfold with a complicated ache in her chest. She had spent 5 years convincing herself that Damien did not deserve a place in her children's lives, that his absence, however unintentional, was proof enough that they were better off without him. But watching him now, patient and gentle, learning their favorite stories and their small habits, with the focus of a man determined never to miss another moment, she felt her carefully built anger beginning to crumble. One evening, after the twins had fallen asleep, Elena found Damien sitting on her porch steps, staring out at the darkened street. "They're wonderful," he said quietly, as she sat down beside him. "You did an incredible job raising them alone." "I didn't have a choice," Elena said, though the sharpness in her voice had softened considerably over the past few days. "I know," Damien said, "and I will spend as long as it takes making up for the years I missed. Not just with them, with you too, if you'll let me." Elena stared out at the quiet street, the porch light casting long shadows across the pavement. Part of her wanted to believe him completely, to let go of 5 years of carefully constructed walls, and let this man back into her heart, the way her children already had. But another part of her, older and more cautious, remembered the sight of Seraphine's hand on his arm, the whispered conversation she had never fully understood. "I want to believe you," she admitted softly. "But trust isn't something that rebuilds overnight, Damien. Not after everything." "I understand," Damien said. "Take whatever time you need. I'm not going anywhere this time." They sat together in comfortable silence, the weight of 5 lost years settling between them, not entirely resolved but no longer quite so heavy as before. Neither of them noticed the faint rustle of movement in the bushes across the street, nor the pair of eyes watching the little house with patient, calculating interest, waiting for the right moment to strike. The following morning, word of the Alpha King's discovery had already begun spreading through channels far beyond Millbrook. In territories miles away, phones rang with hushed voices, exchanging news that the missing Ashgrove heirs had finally been found, living quietly, in the human world under their mother's protection. Some of those who received the news smiled with relief, glad that their king's long search had finally ended in joy, rather than heartbreak. Others, especially in the shadowed corners of rival packs who had spent years plotting against Blackthorn's throne, received the news with far darker intentions, already calculating how 2 small, powerful children might be used to weaken a king who had once seemed untouchable. In a place far from Millbrook's warm little bakery, a woman with pale hair and calculating eyes listened to the same news with a slow, satisfied smile spreading across her face. Seraphine Vale had spent 5 years nursing her wounded pride, and now, finally, an opportunity to reclaim what she believed had always belonged to her was beginning to take shape. She would not let Elena Doyle keep everything so easily. A black car idled at the edge of Harbor Street just after midnight, its engine silent, its windows tinted against curious eyes. Inside sat 2 men who did not belong in Millbrook, men whose scent carried the sharp bite of a rival pack that had watched Blackthorn's throne with envy for years. "The children are inside," one of them murmured, watching the soft glow of a crescent moon nightlight flicker in an upstairs window. "Ashgrove blood, both of them. If we take them quietly, the king will have no choice but to yield territory to keep them safe." His companion said nothing, only nodded once, already calculating the fastest path to the back door. Neither man noticed the shift in the air around them, nor the way the wind had gone suddenly, unnaturally still. Inside the house, Elena woke with a start, her heart pounding before her mind even understood why. Some instinct buried deep beneath years of careful human disguise had stirred awake, warning her that something was wrong. She slipped out of bed and moved quietly down the hallway, checking on Kai and Luna, who slept soundly beneath the soft glow of the crescent moonlight. Then she heard it. The faint creak of a floorboard downstairs that did not belong to her house. Elena's blood ran cold. She grabbed the old iron poker from beside the twins' bedroom fireplace, the one decoration she had never explained to anyone, and crept toward the top of the stairs. Below her, 2 shadows moved through her darkened kitchen, silent and deliberate, heading straight for the stairs that led to her children. "Get away from my family," Elena said, her voice cutting through the darkness like a blade. The 2 men looked up, momentarily startled by the fierce woman standing at the top of the stairs, poker raised, eyes flashing gold, in a way that told them she was not simply human after all, but their surprise lasted only a moment before the larger of the two smiled coldly. "We don't want you," he said. "Just the children. Step aside, and no one gets hurt." "Never," Elena snarled, and something ancient and fierce rose up inside her, a strength she had suppressed for 5 years, while playing the role of an ordinary baker in an ordinary town. She lunged down the stairs just as the man reached for the banister, swinging the poker with a strength that sent him staggering backward into the kitchen table. The second man moved fast, grabbing for Elena's arm, but she twisted free with a speed that surprised even herself, driving her elbow hard into his ribs. The commotion woke the twins, and Elena heard Luna's frightened cry echo down the stairs. "Mama!" Fear sharpened into fury. Elena spun and struck again, faster this time, years of buried instinct finally breaking free, under the pressure of protecting her children. But even with her unexpected strength, 2 trained attackers against 1 woman fighting alone were dangerous odds, and one of the men managed to catch her wrist, twisting hard enough to make her cry out. That was the moment the front door exploded off its hinges. Damien moved through the wreckage like a storm given shape, his eyes blazing gold, his fury a living thing that filled the small house with the crackling energy of a king protecting his own. He crossed the room in 2 strides and tore the attacker away from Elena with terrifying ease, throwing the man across the kitchen with enough force to shatter a chair beneath him. The second attacker turned to flee, but Damien was faster, cutting off his escape at the doorway with a growl that seemed to shake the walls themselves. "You came into my mate's home," Damien said, his voice low and dangerous. "You threatened my children. Tell your masters that Blackthorn does not forgive such things easily." The man's eyes widened with genuine fear, and within moments both attackers had fled into the night, choosing survival over their failed mission, disappearing into the darkness beyond Harbor Street as quickly as they had arrived. Damien turned immediately to Elena, his hands gentle now despite the fury still simmering beneath his skin, checking her wrist where the attacker's grip had left an angry red mark. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently. "I'm fine," Elena said, though her voice shook. "The twins. I need to check on the twins." Together they raced up the stairs, finding Kai and Luna huddled together in the corner of their room, wide-eyed and frightened but unharmed. Elena gathered them both into her arms, holding them tightly, while Damien knelt beside them, checking every inch of the room for any lingering threat. "Is the bad man gone?" Luna whispered against her mother's shoulder. "He's gone, sweetheart," Elena murmured. "He's gone, and your father made sure of it." For the first time since Damien had walked back into their lives, Kai reached out and took his father's hand without hesitation, seeking the same comfort and safety that Elena provided, trusting completely in the strength of the man who had just saved them all. Damien felt something settle in his chest, a fierce and unshakable resolve. Whatever enemies had learned of his children's location, whatever danger now circled his small, fragile family, he would tear apart the whole world before he let anyone touch them again. "We can't stay here," he said quietly to Elena, once the twins had finally drifted back to sleep, exhausted from fear. "Whoever sent those men will try again. Millbrook isn't safe anymore." Elena's throat tightened at the thought of leaving the quiet, ordinary life she had built here. The bakery, the harbor, the small porch where trust had slowly begun rebuilding between them. But looking down at her sleeping children, she knew there was no other choice. "Where would we go?" she asked. "Blackthorn territory," Damien said. "My territory, where I can protect all 3 of you properly, with the full strength of my pack behind us." Elena hesitated, old fears rising alongside new ones. Returning to Blackthorn meant stepping back into the world she had fled 5 years ago, facing the pack that had watched her run from her own wedding, facing whatever remained of Seraphine's influence, facing a life she was not certain she was ready to reclaim. But the memory of those 2 strangers moving through her darkened kitchen, reaching for her children, burned brighter than any old fear. "All right," she said finally, her voice steady, despite the exhaustion pulling at her bones. "We'll go to Blackthorn. But I'm doing this for them, Damien. Not for us. Not yet." Damien nodded, accepting the terms without argument, grateful simply that she was willing to trust him with their safety, even if her heart remained carefully guarded. By dawn, the small house on Harbor Street stood empty, its windows dark, its little bakery closed with a hastily written sign taped to the door. Elena Doyle had vanished from Millbrook just as suddenly as she had once vanished from Blackthorn, but this time she was not running away. This time, she was running toward the one place that might finally keep her children safe. The gates of Blackthorn territory rose out of the morning mist, like something from a memory Elena had tried hard to bury. Tall iron structures wound with old vines, guarded by wolves in human form who straightened the moment they recognized the car approaching. Elena's hands tightened around Luna's small fingers as the gates swung open, 5 years of careful distance collapsing in an instant. Kai pressed his face against the window, staring wide-eyed at the sprawling estate beyond the gates, the grand stone hall where his parents had almost been married 5 years earlier. "This is where you're from?" Kai asked, awe replacing the fear that had gripped him only hours before. "This is where your father is from," Elena said carefully. "Now, I suppose, it's where you're from too." Damien guided them through the estate with quiet efficiency, arranging rooms, posting guards discreetly at every entrance, ensuring that nothing could reach his family again, the way those attackers had reached them in Millbrook. Word of the twins' arrival spread through the pack almost instantly, and by midday, curious eyes watched from windows and doorways as the Alpha King's long-lost mate and children settled into the estate that should have been their home from the beginning. Seraphine Vale arrived at the estate that same afternoon, dressed impeccably, her expression carefully arranged into something resembling concern, though her eyes glittered with calculation the moment she spotted Elena standing near the garden with the twins. "Elena," Seraphine said smoothly, approaching with practiced grace. "What a surprise. I heard rumors, of course, but I never imagined you'd actually return." Elena's spine stiffened instinctively, old wounds reopening at the mere sight of the woman whose hand on Damien's arm had shattered her entire world 5 years ago. "Seraphine," Elena replied evenly, "I wasn't aware you were still welcome here." Seraphine's smile flickered, just for a moment, before smoothing back into place. "Damien and I have history, dear, but that doesn't simply disappear because you've decided to reappear with his children in tow." That history, Damien's voice cut in sharply from behind them, ended long before Elena and I were ever together, and you know that perfectly well, Seraphine. Seraphine turned, her expression shifting seamlessly into wounded innocence. "Damien, I only came to welcome your family home. There's no need for hostility." "There's every need," Damien said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "When the woman standing in my garden spent the better part of 5 years spreading rumors, designed to keep my mate from ever trusting me again." Elena's breath caught. "What did you say?" Damien's jaw tightened, clearly wishing he had chosen a better moment for this revelation, but there was no taking the words back now. "Seraphine has been telling pack members for years that our marriage ended because I never stopped loving her. That rumor made its way through channels far beyond Blackthorn, Elena. If it ever reached Millbrook through pack contacts, it would have confirmed every fear that sent you running in the first place." Elena turned slowly toward Seraphine, understanding beginning to dawn with sickening clarity. "You knew where I might be. You could have found me at any point over these 5 years." "I did no such thing," Seraphine said quickly, though the flicker of panic behind her eyes told a different story entirely. "Enough," Damien said sharply. "Seraphine, you no longer have standing in this territory. Effective immediately, you are banished from Blackthorn lands. Any further contact with my family will be treated as a direct threat against the crown." Seraphine's composure finally cracked, fury flashing openly across her features. "You cannot simply discard me after everything, Damien. After everything I have done for this pack." "I can," Damien said quietly, "and I have. Leave now, before I have you escorted out." Seraphine's eyes flashed toward Elena one final time, filled with venom she no longer bothered to hide, before turning sharply and storming away from the estate, her heels clicking furiously against the stone pathway, until she disappeared entirely from view. Elena stood frozen for a long moment, the weight of 5 lost years pressing down upon her all at once. Every night she had spent convincing herself Damien had chosen Seraphine over her, every sleepless hour spent raising 2 children alone, while nursing a broken heart, all of it rooted in lies, deliberately spread to keep her away. "Why didn't you tell me any of this sooner?" Elena asked quietly, her voice trembling. "I didn't know the full extent of what she'd done, until my people investigated after we found you," Damien admitted. "I suspected she resented our marriage, but I never imagined she would go so far as to poison the well between us from a distance. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, staring out at the garden where Kai and Luna played nearby, blissfully unaware of the storm of truth breaking open around their parents. 5 years, she whispered. 5 years I could have had you. Had this. If I had just asked you what I saw instead of running. Damien stepped closer, gently taking her hands in his. We cannot change what already happened, Elena, but we can decide what happens next. I am done letting fear and misunderstanding steal any more time from us. Elena looked up at him, searching his face for any trace of doubt, finding none. For the first time since fleeing her own wedding 5 years ago, she allowed herself to imagine a future built on truth instead of fear. I still need time, she said softly. The truth doesn't erase 5 years overnight. But I'm willing to try, Damien. For them. And maybe, eventually, for us too. Damien pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, relief and hope mingling in his golden eyes. That's all I've ever wanted since the night you disappeared. A chance to try again. Behind them, unnoticed by either parent, a pack guard stationed near the estate's outer wall frowned at his radio, listening to a hushed report crackling through from the border patrol. Strange scents had been detected near the southern perimeter overnight. Scents that did not belong to any registered pack member. Scents that matched reports of the same rival faction that had attacked the family in Millbrook. Seraphine's banishment had solved one problem, but the danger circling Damien's newfound family was far from finished, and the guard's frown deepened as he relayed the warning further up the chain of command, unaware that trouble was already gathering just beyond Blackthorn's borders, waiting patiently for its next opportunity to strike. 3 weeks passed at Blackthorn Estate, and slowly, cautiously, something resembling peace began to settle over the family that had been torn apart for 5 long years. Kai and Luna adjusted to their new surroundings with the easy resilience of children, quickly befriending the pack's other young ones, learning to run through the gardens without fear, discovering that the strange strength and sharp senses they had always possessed were not something to hide, but something to be proud of. Elena watched her children laugh freely for the first time in years, no longer forced to whisper warnings about controlling their tempers in front of curious human neighbors. Damien, meanwhile, worked tirelessly to prove that his devotion was not simply words spoken in a moment of crisis, but a steady, daily commitment. He rearranged pack meetings to have breakfast with his children each morning. He learned Luna liked her stories read twice, once quietly and once with silly voices, and that Kai preferred to fall asleep listening to tales of ancient Blackthorn warriors, rather than typical children's stories. Elena found herself softening in ways she had not expected, watching this powerful king kneel patiently in the garden dirt to help Luna search for a lost bracelet, watching him wrestle good-naturedly with Kai despite his exhaustion after long council sessions dealing with the fallout of Seraphine's banishment. One evening, after the twins had been tucked into bed, Elena found herself walking the estate's quiet garden paths alongside Damien, the tension between them looser than it had been in years. They're happy here, Elena admitted softly. Happier than I expected, honestly. And you? Damien asked carefully. Are you happy here? Elena considered the question seriously before answering. I'm cautious, but I think, for the first time in 5 years, I'm not afraid anymore. Not of this place. Not of you. Damien stopped walking, turning to face her, fully beneath the soft glow of garden lanterns. That means more to me than you know. I owe you an apology too, Elena said quietly. I should have trusted you enough to ask what I saw that night, instead of assuming the worst and running. I let 5 years slip away because of my own fear. We both made mistakes, Damien said gently. I should have handled Seraphine's obsession more directly from the start, instead of assuming it would simply fade away on its own. If I had, perhaps you never would have seen anything that night to misunderstand in the first place. Elena managed a small, genuine smile, the first she had offered him freely since arriving at Blackthorn. Perhaps we're both simply better at looking backward than we are at avoiding mistakes in the first place. Damien laughed softly, the sound warm and unguarded. Perhaps. But I would like to spend considerably more time looking forward with you, if you'll allow it. Elena studied his face in the lantern light, searching for any trace of the fear that had once driven her away, finding instead only quiet, patient hope. Slowly, she reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his for the first time in 5 years. "I think I'd like that too," she said softly. They stood together in comfortable silence, the garden quiet around them, the estate finally beginning to feel less like a place Elena had fled, and more like a home she was slowly, carefully choosing to build again. Over the following days, small moments continued to knit the family back together. Damien began teaching Kai simple lessons about pack history, careful to frame everything as an adventure rather than a burden, watching his son's eyes light with pride at learning where he came from. Luna, meanwhile, had taken a particular interest in the estate's garden, following the old groundskeeper around with endless questions about which flowers were the prettiest and which ones smelled the best. Elena, for her part, began slowly stepping into the role she had once fled from entirely. She met with pack members cautiously, rebuilding relationships she had abandoned 5 years earlier, discovering that many held no resentment toward her at all, only relief that their king's long search had finally reached a happy conclusion. Still, beneath the surface of this slowly healing family, quiet tension lingered. Reports continued trickling in from the border patrol about unfamiliar scents near Blackthorn's perimeter, careful and deliberate, never quite close enough to be caught, never quite far enough away to be dismissed as nothing. Damien kept these reports largely to himself, unwilling to disturb the fragile peace his family had only just begun to find, though he doubled security discreetly around the estate's outer walls and increased patrols near any area where Kai and Luna might wander unsupervised. One afternoon, while Elena baked in the estate's expansive kitchen, finding comfort in the familiar rhythm of flour and dough, even here in this grand unfamiliar place, Damien entered quietly, his expression more serious than she had seen since their arrival. "What's wrong?" Elena asked immediately, setting down her rolling pin. "Nothing you need to worry about tonight," Damien said carefully, though the tightness around his eyes told a different story. "But I want to increase our security measures around the twins, just as a precaution." Elena's stomach tightened with old fear. "Damien, if there's a real threat, I need to know." Damien hesitated, clearly weighing how much to share, before finally sighing and pulling out a chair to sit across from her. "There have been signs of unfamiliar activity near our borders. Nothing confirmed yet, but similar enough to what we saw in Millbrook that I'm not willing to take chances." Elena's hands trembled slightly as she absorbed this information, old fear mixing with new determination. "Then we protect them, whatever it takes." "Whatever it takes," Damien agreed firmly, reaching across the table to take her hand. Outside the kitchen window, evening shadows lengthened across the estate's quiet gardens, hiding whatever secrets still lurked beyond Blackthorn's borders, waiting patiently for an opportunity that both Elena and Damien were now fiercely determined to prevent. The council chamber at Blackthorn Estate had not seen such tension in years, its long wooden table surrounded by pack elders, whose faces reflected a mixture of concern and quiet fury, as Damien laid out the reports his scouts had gathered over the past several weeks. "The scent patterns match a faction operating out of the Eastern Territories," said Marcus Kell, Damien's most trusted advisor, pointing toward a map spread across the table. "The same faction that has challenged Blackthorn's borders twice in the past decade. It appears they've learned of the king's children, and see them as an opportunity to weaken our position." "Weaken us how?" asked another elder, frowning deeply. "If they capture the children," Marcus said grimly, "they gain leverage. They could demand territory, resources, even a shift in alliance in exchange for their safe return. Or worse, they could simply eliminate them to destabilize the succession entirely." Damien's fists clenched atop the table, his jaw tight with barely restrained fury. "That will not happen. I want double patrols along every border point immediately, and I want eyes on anyone attempting to enter Millbrook or track Elena's former associates there." "Understood, my king," Marcus said, already making notes. Elena, seated quietly at the edge of the council chamber, felt her chest tighten with fear that had nothing to do with old wounds, and everything to do with the very real danger now threatening her children. She had spent 5 years protecting Kai and Luna from a world she barely understood herself, and now that same world was closing in around them, with far greater stakes than she had ever imagined. After the council meeting concluded, Elena found Damien alone in his study, staring at the same map that had dominated the earlier discussion, his expression heavy with the weight of responsibility. "Tell me honestly," Elena said, closing the door behind her. How dangerous is this? Damien looked up, clearly debating how much to share before deciding, finally, that Elena deserved the complete truth. Dangerous enough that I won't feel at ease until this threat is neutralized entirely. This faction has attacked before, always calculating, always patient. They won't rush a mistake. Then we won't wait for them to make a move, Elena said firmly. We need a plan, Damien. Something proactive, not just increased patrols and hoping for the best. Damien studied her for a long moment, something like admiration flickering behind his tired eyes. You've changed, Elena. 5 years ago, you might have run from a threat like this. 5 years ago, I was running from heartbreak, not real danger, Elena said quietly. This is different. These are my children we're talking about. I won't run from anything that threatens them. Damien reached across the desk, taking her hand firmly in his. Then we face this together. I'll arrange additional protection for the twins immediately, and we'll begin gathering intelligence on this faction's exact location and intentions. Over the following days, Blackthorn Estate transformed subtly but noticeably, security tightening around every corner, without disrupting the twins' daily routines too obviously. Elena insisted on learning basic defensive techniques herself, refusing to remain helpless, should danger ever reach her children again, the way it had in Millbrook. Kai and Luna, still blissfully unaware of the shadow gathering beyond their new home's walls, continued adjusting happily to pack life, forming friendships, learning about their heritage, growing more confident in their unique strength each day. Damien made certain their innocence remained protected as long as possible, determined that his children would not carry the weight of danger before they were old enough to understand it fully. One quiet evening, as Elena tucked Luna into bed, her daughter looked up with unexpected seriousness in her golden eyes. "Mama, are we safe here?" Luna asked softly. Elena's heart clenched, wondering how much her daughter had sensed, despite everyone's efforts to shield her. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" "Everyone seems worried," Luna said simply. "Papa looks tired all the time now, and there are more guards in the garden than before." Elena smoothed her daughter's hair gently, choosing her words with careful honesty. "Your father and I are working very hard to make sure you and Kai are always safe, no matter what. That's our most important job." "Will the bad men come back?" Luna asked, her small voice trembling slightly. "Not if we have anything to say about it," Elena said firmly, pressing a gentle kiss to her daughter's forehead. "You don't need to worry, Luna. That's what grown-ups are for." Luna seemed to accept this answer, snuggling deeper beneath her blankets, her eyes drifting closed beneath the soft glow of her crescent moon nightlight. Elena remained beside her daughter's bed long after she had fallen asleep, watching the gentle rise and fall of her breathing, silently vowing that no threat, however calculated or patient, would ever succeed in tearing her family apart again. Down the hallway, in the estate's private study, Damien remained awake long into the night, reviewing every scrap of intelligence his scouts had gathered, determined to identify the faction's next move before they had any opportunity to execute it. He would not simply wait to react to danger this time. He would meet it head-on, with the full strength of Blackthorn behind him, protecting the family he had fought 5 long years to find. Outside, beyond the estate's carefully guarded walls, the Eastern faction continued its patient preparations, unaware that the king they sought to challenge was no longer simply reacting to threats, but actively hunting the shadows that dared circle his children. The quiet peace of Blackthorn Estate remained intact for now, but everyone within its walls understood, with growing certainty, that the true confrontation was still to come. The alarm bells across Blackthorn Estate rang out just after midnight, shattering the fragile peace the family had worked so hard to maintain. Elena bolted upright in bed, her heart already racing before her mind fully registered the sound. Damien was on his feet instantly, pulling on clothes with practiced speed, his expression hardening into the fierce, commanding presence of a king preparing for battle. "Stay with the twins," he ordered. "I need to find out what's happening at the perimeter." "Damien, wait," Elena started, but he was already moving toward the door, his focus entirely on the threat that had finally, after weeks of patient waiting, made its move. Elena raced down the hallway to the twins' room, finding Kai and Luna already awake, frightened by the alarm bells echoing through the estate. She gathered them both close, her mind racing through every possible escape route, every defensive position she had practiced over the past several weeks. "What's happening, Mama?" Kai asked, his voice trembling despite his effort to sound brave. I don't know yet, sweetheart, Elena admitted, but we're going to be okay. I promise you that. Outside, chaos had erupted along the estate's southern perimeter. A dozen intruders had breached the outer wall under cover of darkness, moving with military precision toward the main house. Clearly aware of exactly where the children's rooms were located, Damien met the first wave of attackers at the garden's edge, his fury unleashed in full force, his wolf form emerging with terrifying speed as he tore through the intruders, with the strength of a king protecting everything he held dear. Marcus Kell rallied the estate's guards quickly, organizing a defensive perimeter around the main house, while Damien pushed forward, determined to eliminate the threat before it ever reached Elena and the twins. Inside, Elena heard the sounds of battle drawing closer, snarls and shouts echoing through the estate's halls. She made a swift decision, guiding Kai and Luna toward the hidden passage Damien had shown her only days earlier, a narrow corridor built generations ago for exactly this kind of emergency. We're going to play a very important game, Elena told the twins calmly, despite her pounding heart. We need to be very quiet and very brave, just like the stories Papa tells you about Blackthorn warriors. Kai nodded solemnly, taking his sister's hand protectively as they slipped into the hidden passage together. Elena guided them through the narrow corridor, every sound from the estate above sending fresh waves of fear through her chest, though she forced herself to remain steady for her children's sake. They emerged near the estate's eastern wing, only to find two intruders had somehow anticipated this exact escape route, blocking their path forward. Elena's blood ran cold, but there was no time for fear now, only action. She pushed Kai and Luna behind her, positioning herself between her children and the approaching threat, drawing on the same fierce strength that had surprised even her back in Millbrook. "You will not touch my children," Elena said, her voice steady and dangerous, despite the fear coursing through her veins. The first intruder lunged forward, but Elena moved faster than he expected, years of suppressed strength finally breaking free entirely, as she twisted away from his grasp and struck back with precise, controlled force. The second intruder circled, attempting to flank her, but Elena refused to yield ground, keeping herself firmly between the threat and her children, no matter the cost. Just as the second intruder closed in, a powerful shape crashed through the corridor wall, sending debris scattering in every direction. Damien, still partially shifted, his eyes blazing gold with fury, tore the intruder away from Elena with devastating force, ending the threat within seconds. "Elena! The twins!" Damien called urgently, his focus immediately shifting to ensure his family's safety. "We're okay," Elena gasped, pulling Kai and Luna close, relief flooding through her, as Damien quickly shifted fully back to his human form, wrapping protective arms around all three of them. "The estate is secure," Damien said, though exhaustion and lingering adrenaline colored his voice. "Marcus has captured several of the intruders alive. We'll learn exactly who sent them and why." Elena held her children tightly, her body finally beginning to shake now that the immediate danger had passed. "They knew exactly where to find us, Damien. They knew about the hidden passage, which means someone provided them with detailed information about this estate," Damien said grimly, his expression darkening with a realization neither of them wanted to voice aloud. Information only someone close to us could have shared. Elena's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Seraphine. We'll find out," Damien said firmly. "But first, let's get everyone somewhere safe, and see to any injuries." As dawn broke over Blackthorn Estate, the full scope of the night's danger became clear. Several intruders had been captured, their interrogations already underway, under Marcus's careful supervision. The estate's defenses had held, but only barely, and the revelation that someone within their own circle may have provided crucial information cast a heavy shadow over what should have been a moment of relief. Elena sat with her children in the estate's kitchen, as dawn light filtered through the windows, watching Kai and Luna slowly calm from their fright, grateful beyond words that her family remained whole and safe. Damien joined them eventually, his expression grim but resolute. "The prisoners have confirmed what we suspected. Seraphine provided detailed information about the estate's layout, in exchange for a promise of restored standing within the pack, once the threat against us was eliminated." Elena's hands tightened into fists atop the table. She would risk our children's lives out of pure spite. "She will answer for this fully," Damien said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. This goes far beyond simple banishment now. This is treason against the crown itself. Elena looked at her children, safe now in her arms, despite the terror of the night before, and felt a fierce, protective resolve settle deep within her chest. Whatever consequences awaited Seraphine, whatever battles still remained ahead, she would not allow fear to control her family's future ever again. Then let's make certain, Elena said firmly, that nothing like this ever threatens them again. Damien nodded, taking her hand in solidarity, both of them united now, more fully than ever before in their shared determination to protect the family that had already survived so much, and would not be broken by threats from either the shadows or those who had once pretended to be allies. The formal hearing convened 3 days after the attack. Blackthorn's Grand Council chamber filled with pack elders, guards, and witnesses summoned to address the treason that had nearly cost the king his family. Seraphine Vale stood before the council, her composure noticeably shaken despite her attempts to maintain the same cool defiance she had displayed weeks earlier in the garden. The evidence against her was overwhelming, corroborated by multiple captured intruders whose testimonies aligned perfectly regarding the detailed information she had provided about the estate's layout and security measures. "I want to know why," Damien said, his voice carrying across the silent chamber, cold and controlled, despite the fury Elena knew simmered beneath his composed exterior. "Why would you endanger innocent children out of nothing more than wounded pride?" Seraphine's chin lifted defiantly, though her eyes betrayed genuine fear now that consequences loomed inescapably before her. "I never intended for the children to be harmed. I only wanted her gone." Her gaze flicked toward Elena, sharp with residual resentment. "I wanted my rightful place restored, the place I lost the moment you chose her over me." "There was never a choice to make," Damien said firmly. "Our relationship ended long before Elena and I ever met, Seraphine. You have spent years refusing to accept that truth, and your refusal nearly cost me everything I hold dear." Elena, seated beside Damien as was now her right as his acknowledged mate, spoke for the first time during the proceedings. "You spread lies for 5 years, hoping to keep me away permanently. When that wasn't enough, you provided information to men willing to harm my children. There is no justification that makes that forgivable." Murmurs rippled through the council chamber, pack elders exchanging grim glances as the full weight of Seraphine's betrayal settled over the room. Marcus Kell, standing at Damien's right hand, addressed the council formally. "The evidence is conclusive," Marcus stated. Seraphine Vale provided material support to a hostile faction, directly endangering the lives of the king's children and his mate. Blackthorn law is clear regarding such treason. Damien rose slowly, his expression carrying the full weight and authority of his position, as he addressed Seraphine directly. "You are hereby stripped of all pack privileges and permanently exiled from Blackthorn territory, effective immediately. Any attempt to return, or any further contact with my family, will be treated as an act of war against this pack." Seraphine's composure finally shattered entirely, tears spilling down her face, as guards moved to escort her from the chamber. "Damien, please. 5 years of my life belong to this pack. And you spent those years plotting against the family who never wronged you," Damien said, his voice final and unyielding. "This judgment stands." The guards led Seraphine from the chamber, her protests fading into the corridor beyond, leaving behind a heavy silence that gradually gave way to quiet murmurs of approval from the assembled pack members. Justice, however painful, had been served. Afterward, Elena and Damien walked together through the estate's gardens, both processing the weight of everything that had unfolded over the past several weeks. The immediate threat had been neutralized, the traitor within their midst finally exposed and removed, but the emotional toll of everything they had endured lingered heavily between them. "It's finally over," Elena said quietly, though relief mingled uncertainly with lingering exhaustion in her voice. "This particular threat is over," Damien corrected gently, "but I suspect the world will always present new challenges to a family like ours. What matters is that we face them together from now on, with complete honesty between us." Elena stopped walking, turning to face him fully beneath the afternoon sun filtering through the garden's old oak trees. "I think I'm finally ready to stop being afraid, Damien, of the past, of the future, of trusting you completely again." Damien's breath caught, hope flaring bright behind his golden eyes. "Elena, I'm not saying everything is fixed instantly," Elena continued carefully. But watching you fight for our children, watching you handle Seraphine's betrayal with such clear conviction, I understand now what I couldn't see 5 years ago. You have always been the man I fell in love with. I was simply too afraid to trust that truth." Damien reached for her hands, holding them gently as emotion thickened his voice. "I will spend every day for the rest of my life proving that trust was never misplaced." For the first time since fleeing her own wedding, 5 years earlier, Elena leaned forward and kissed him, soft and certain, sealing a promise neither of them was willing to break again. The garden around them seemed to hold its breath, golden afternoon light casting everything in warm, hopeful color, as 5 years of separation finally began transforming into something new and unbreakable. From an upstairs window, Kai and Luna watched their parents together in the garden below, small faces pressed curiously against the glass. "Are they going to get married now?" Luna asked her brother, tilting her head thoughtfully. Kai grinned, golden eyes bright with the simple certainty of childhood. "I hope so. Then we'll really be a proper family." Downstairs, unaware they were being observed, Elena and Damien remained wrapped in their embrace. 5 years of pain, finally giving way to a future neither of them intended to run from, ever again. With Seraphine's exile complete, and the Eastern factions remaining conspirators, identified and dealt with through careful diplomatic and military pressure from Blackthorn's allies, a genuine sense of peace finally began settling over the estate. Elena found herself embracing her role within the pack more fully each day. No longer the frightened woman who had once fled from responsibilities she felt unprepared to carry. She began working alongside pack elders to establish better systems for identifying and integrating human-raised children of mixed heritage, drawing on her own experience raising Kai and Luna outside traditional pack structures. "You have a unique understanding that none of us possess," Marcus Kell told her during one such meeting, genuine respect coloring his voice. "Perhaps there is wisdom in what circumstance forced upon you these past 5 years." Elena smiled, finding unexpected pride in work that gave meaning to the difficult years she had spent alone. "If my experience can help other families avoid unnecessary hardship, then perhaps something good came from all of it after all." Meanwhile, Damien worked diligently to strengthen Blackthorn's borders and alliances, ensuring that no future faction would ever again see his family as vulnerable targets for political manipulation. He also made significant efforts to spend quality time with his children daily, refusing to let the demands of leadership steal away the precious years he had already missed. Kai had begun showing particular interest in pack history and leadership responsibilities, following Damien through council meetings with focused curiosity that reminded everyone present of the king himself at a similar age. Luna, meanwhile, had discovered a talent for herbalism, spending hours in the estate's gardens learning from the pack's healers about the medicinal properties of various plants, her sharp mind absorbing information with remarkable speed. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner in the estate's more casual dining room, Luna looked up from her plate with characteristic directness. "Papa, when will you and Mama get married?" she asked, causing both her parents to nearly choke on their food simultaneously. Kai grinned mischievously beside his sister. "We've been wondering. Everyone at the estate keeps asking when there will be a proper wedding." Elena and Damien exchanged a glance across the table, warmth and amusement passing silently between them. Over the past several weeks, their relationship had deepened steadily, moving past the caution and hesitation that had initially defined their reunion into something that felt increasingly solid and secure. "Would you two like that?" Damien asked his children carefully. "A wedding?" "Yes," Luna exclaimed immediately, practically bouncing in her seat with excitement. Kai nodded enthusiastically. "Then we'd really officially be a family, forever and always." Elena felt her heart swell with emotion, watching her children's genuine excitement at the prospect of formalizing what already felt, in every meaningful sense, like a complete and loving family unit. She looked toward Damien, finding the same warmth and hope reflected in his golden eyes. "What do you think?" Damien asked her quietly, his voice carrying a question that extended far beyond simply satisfying their children's wishes. Elena reached across the table, taking his hand firmly in hers. "I think," she said slowly, savoring the moment, "that I am finally ready to walk down that aisle and actually reach the end of it this time." The table erupted into cheers, Kai and Luna celebrating with the pure, uncomplicated joy of children whose family was finally, completely whole. Damien rose from his seat and moved around the table, kneeling formally before Elena, despite the informal setting, producing a ring he had apparently been carrying for weeks, waiting patiently for the right moment. "Elena Doyle," he said, using the name she had claimed during her years in hiding, "will you do me the honor of becoming my wife, properly and completely, with no shadows or misunderstandings left between us?" Tears filled Elena's eyes as she nodded, unable to form words for a moment, before finally managing a soft, certain yes. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation, the entire Blackthorn pack eager to celebrate the joyful conclusion to a story that had captivated everyone's attention for months. Elena found herself surprisingly at ease with the elaborate preparations this time, no longer burdened by the fear and uncertainty that had haunted her original wedding 5 years earlier. She spent afternoons with Luna, teaching her daughter simple recipes in the estate's kitchen, passing down skills learned during her years running the little bakery in Millbrook. She watched Damien teach Kai basic leadership principles during quiet evening walks through the estate's gardens, patiently answering his son's endless questions about what it meant to one day lead the pack. Slowly, deliberately, the family that had been separated by fear and misunderstanding for 5 long years rebuilt itself into something even stronger than what might have existed had that original wedding day never been interrupted at all. Trust, once broken, had been painstakingly reconstructed through honesty, patience, and shared adversity, creating a foundation far more resilient than anything built on assumption or unspoken fear. As the day of the wedding finally approached, Elena stood once again before a mirror in a beautiful gown, this time surrounded not by uncertainty and doubt, but by the joyful chaos of her children helping arrange her hair, Kai solemnly declaring himself in charge of guarding the wedding rings, Luna insisting on choosing which flowers would decorate her mother's hair. "Are you nervous, Mama?" Kai asked, watching her expression carefully in the mirror's reflection. Elena smiled, meeting her son's golden eyes, so like his father's, so full of hope and love. "Not this time, sweetheart. This time, I know exactly where I belong." The great hall of Blackthorn Estate had been transformed entirely, golden light streaming through tall windows onto rows of guests gathered to witness what many considered the most remarkable love story their pack had ever known. Elena stood at the entrance of the hall, her heart steady and full, nothing like the racing panic that had driven her from this very building 5 years earlier. Through the open doors, she could see Damien waiting at the altar, dressed formally, his expression carrying none of the political weight of a king today, only the pure, unguarded joy of a man finally receiving everything he had spent 5 years searching to reclaim. Beside her, Kai stood proudly in a small formal suit, solemnly guarding the wedding rings, resting on a velvet cushion, as though they were the most important treasure in the entire kingdom. Luna walked just ahead, scattering flower petals along the aisle, with gleeful concentration, her golden eyes bright with excitement. As the music began, Elena took her first steps down the aisle, and this time, there was no curtain hiding secrets, no whispered conversation catching her off guard, no fear driving her toward the exit. There was only Damien, watching her approach with such open adoration that tears gathered in her eyes before she had even reached the halfway point of the aisle. The pack elders who had gathered 5 years earlier for a wedding that never concluded now witnessed its true completion, murmurs of joy rippling through the crowd as Elena finally reached the altar, taking Damien's outstretched hands in hers. "You came back," Damien whispered, emotion thick in his voice despite the formal setting. "I never should have left," Elena whispered back. "But I'm here now, completely, and I'm not going anywhere ever again." The ceremony proceeded with quiet dignity, ancient Blackthorn traditions woven throughout, binding not just 2 individuals but an entire family together, in a bond recognized by pack law, and celebrated by everyone present. When the moment came for Damien to formally acknowledge Kai and Luna as his heirs before the assembled pack, both children stepped forward with matching solemn expressions that dissolved instantly into delighted grins the moment the formal words were spoken. By the ancient laws of Blackthorn, the pack elder, presiding over the ceremony, declared, "Kai and Luna Ashgrove are hereby recognized as the rightful heirs to this territory, children of King Damien and Queen Elena, born of true love and destined to carry this pack's legacy forward into the future." Cheers erupted throughout the hall, 5 years of separation and struggle finally giving way to a celebration that echoed with pure, uncomplicated joy. Elena looked out at the sea of faces before her, pack members who had once watched her flee in fear, now welcoming her home with open hearts, and felt something settle deep within her chest that she recognized, finally, as complete belonging. As the formal ceremony concluded and celebrations began throughout the estate, Elena found a quiet moment alone with Damien on the same garden balcony where trust had first begun rebuilding between them weeks earlier. 5 years, Elena said softly, looking out over the gardens now filled with celebrating guests. 5 years of running, hiding, raising our children alone, convinced I was protecting them from a broken heart, and it led us here anyway. Perhaps some bonds simply cannot be outrun, Damien said, wrapping his arms gently around her from behind, no matter how far or how long someone tries. Elena turned within his embrace, looking up at the man she had once fled from, and now willingly chosen to spend the rest of her life beside. I'm grateful, in the end, that you never stopped searching. I would have searched forever, Damien said simply, because some things are worth chasing, no matter how long it takes to find them. Below them, in the garden, Kai and Luna ran between celebrating pack members, laughing freely, completely secure in a family finally whole and unshakable. The dangers that had once threatened them lay defeated behind them. The misunderstandings that had once separated their parents finally resolved through patience, honesty, and unwavering love. As evening settled gently over Blackthorn Estate, string lights glowing softly throughout the gardens, music and laughter filling the air, Elena leaned against her husband, watching their children play beneath the very same sky that had once witnessed her desperate flight 5 years earlier. This time, there would be no running. This time, the family that fear and misunderstanding had once threatened to destroy stood together, complete and unbreakable, ready to face whatever the future held, not as separate individuals fighting alone, but as one united family, bound by love that had survived 5 years of separation and emerged stronger for having endured it. The Alpha King had chased his runaway bride for 5 years, and in finding her, had discovered something far more precious than he ever imagined. Not just the woman he loved, but the family that made his kingdom, and his heart, truly complete.